They said I was invisible, a quiet girl with nothing to say, nothing to offer, and nothing to become. They said silence meant weakness. But what they didn't know was, silence remembers, silence observes, silence plans. My name is Amara. And this is how I painted my revenge. I used to believe that good intentions were enough, that kindness would somehow protect me from cruelty, that talent would eventually speak for itself. But I learned something the hard way. People don't always clap for you, sometimes. They just wait for you to fall. I was 17, living in Wellington, New Zealand, the city of dreams and winds, a place where I thought I'd finally find my voice through art. I was in my final year at Hartwell Academy, the most competitive art school in the country, and I had one goal: to win the National Art Scholarship. But I wasn't the only one chasing it. There was Lara, my best friend, or so I thought. She was confident, loud, beautiful, the kind of girl people noticed when she walked into a room. And me, I was the quiet one, the listener, the helper, the shadow behind her spotlight. I used to stay up late with her, helping her paint, sketch, brainstorm ideas. She'd say things like, "You're so creative, Amara. I wish I had your mind." And I'd smile, not realizing those words were meant to disarm me, not praise me. You see, I always believed friendship was sacred, that helping a friend shine doesn't dim your own light. But I was wrong, because sometimes, when you help someone climb too high, they forget who built the ladder. Mr. Hayes, our art tutor, believed in me more than anyone. He'd often say, "Amara, your art doesn't just speak, it breathes." Those words used to make me blush, because for the first time, someone saw me for what I truly was, not the girl behind someone else's success. Then came the announcement, the National Art Exhibition, the one event that could change our lives forever. The winner would get a full scholarship, a global tour, and a mentorship with Elena Quinn, one of the most respected artists in the world. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. So I started working day and night, pouring every drop of myself into a single painting, one that told my mother's story. She was my reason, my inspiration, a woman who worked double shifts cleaning offices, just to afford my brushes and paints. There were nights she'd come home exhausted, her hands trembling, her voice soft but full of faith. "One day, your art will speak for both of us, Amara." And those words kept me going. But I didn't realize that while I was creating something pure, something honest, someone else was watching me with envy. Someone who couldn't stand the thought of me shining brighter than her. Lara started visiting my studio more often, asking questions, pretending to be curious about my work, about my theme, about my ideas. And I, naive as ever, told her everything. I told her about the title, Mother's Hands, about the strokes, the textures, even the meaning behind each color. She listened closely, smiled, and said, "That's beautiful, Amara, truly." And for a moment, I believed her. But sometimes, admiration is just a mask envy wears before it strikes. It happened 2 weeks before the exhibition. The whole school was buzzing with excitement, everyone preparing their final pieces, and Mr. Hayes kept reminding us, authenticity wins hearts, not perfection. I should have felt proud, confident even. But something about Lara's sudden kindness started to feel off. She'd offer to help me frame my piece, or check my lighting. Things she'd never cared about before. Still, I let her in. Because that's what I always did, trusted too easily, forgave too quickly, believed too deeply. The night before submission, I stayed in the studio till midnight, adding the final strokes to Mother's Hands. It was everything I'd ever wanted to say: love, sacrifice, pain, hope, all living on that single canvas. When I finally covered it up and turned off the lights, I smiled to myself. For once, I was ready to be seen. But when I returned the next morning, everything changed. The air in the studio felt heavier. Whispers followed me as I walked in. And then I saw it. My painting uncovered, altered, violated. The gentle hands I'd painted, my mother's hands, were now smeared with black paint, her palms turned crimson, dripping down like blood. And across the top of the canvas, in bold black letters, someone had written, "Liar." My chest tightened. My breath caught between my ribs. Everyone was staring. Even Mr. Hayes. He looked at me, confused, disappointed, like he wasn't sure what to believe. And then Lara spoke. Softly, almost innocently, she said, "I told her not to copy my concept, sir, but she wouldn't listen." The room gasped. Copy. My concept. I froze, the world spinning beneath me. Mr. Hayes turned to me, his voice low, controlled. "Amara, is that true?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. But no one heard my silence. They heard her lies. The principal was called, the committee informed. And just like that, I was disqualified. Years of work. Gone. My reputation. Destroyed. And Lara, standing there with fake tears in her eyes, pretending to be the victim. Later that day, as I packed up my supplies, I heard her laugh with her friends in the hallway. That same soft laugh. Like a knife behind a compliment. She'd not only stolen my idea, she'd destroyed the evidence that it was mine. That night, I went home to my mother and lied. I told her the school postponed the exhibition, that my piece needed more work. She smiled and said, "That's okay, my love. Perfection takes patience." And I smiled back. But inside, something broke. That was the night I stopped believing in fairness. That was the night silence turned into fire. Would you have forgiven her? Or would you have done what I did next? For days, I couldn't paint, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at my brushes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that word, liar, written across my mother's hands. It wasn't just my art they ruined. It was my voice, my truth, my soul. Lara went on to win the competition. Course she did. Her piece looked strangely familiar. A concept about sacrifice and motherhood. The same textures, the same tones. Even the same lighting I had planned to use. But no one questioned it. Why would they? The quiet girl had already been labeled a fraud. People avoided me in the hallways, whispered when I passed. And the teachers, they looked away. Silence became my only companion again. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was loud, screaming inside me. One afternoon, I overheard Lara and her friends at the cafeteria. They were laughing, replaying the whole thing like a comedy scene. "She actually cried," one of them said, and Lara laughed. "Told you she'd break." That was the moment something inside me hardened. The tears stopped. The pain cooled into something sharper. Not hatred, not rage exactly, but a quiet hunger for balance. That night, I walked to the studio alone. No lights. Just moonlight spilling through the glass roof. I sat in front of my ruined painting, the one they mocked, and whispered, "You thought you buried me, but you just planted me." I began to repaint, not to fix it, but to transform it. Every smear became a scar. Every mark a memory. The hands that once bled now glowed with gold. It was no longer mother's hands. It was reborn. And as the gold dried under the moonlight, I realized something powerful. I didn't need to beg the world to see me. I would make them. The next morning, I walked into school like nothing had happened. No makeup, no smiles, just silence, but this time, it wasn't weakness. It was a warning. Even Mr. Hayes looked at me differently. He said, "You have that look, Amara, like someone who's done waiting." And he was right. 'Cause I was done waiting, done hiding, done losing. That day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to expose Lara with words. I was going to make her destroy herself. Would you have done the same? I stopped telling anyone how I felt. I started writing it instead. At first, it was just a private notebook, words and sketches that kept me company at night. Then, I scanned one of the pages and posted it online, anonymously. under a name I made up that sounded like a secret, the Mute Muse. The first post was small, a single image of the repaired hands, the gold catching light like a laugh. I didn't expect anything. I posted because I needed to speak without speaking. But the internet heard me. Comments rolled in, strangers writing things like, "Who painted this? This is heartbreak and hope in one frame." And for the first time since the show, someone was listening. I watched the notifications like a careful tide, each ping like a small victory. It was quiet, secret, and perfect. No faces, no names, only art that said the truth I couldn't shout. That's when Elena Quinn noticed. She sent a private message, a sentence that felt like sunlight through old curtains. "Who are you?" My heart jumped. But I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to chase the art, not the name. She messaged again. "Your work breathes pain, and pain remembers. There's power in that." We began to talk in coded messages, her words full of praise and small challenges. "Push harder, show more truth. The world will listen if you make it hurt a little." She gave me reading lists, she sent me links to exhibitions. She asked for more images. No questions about who I was. It felt like being tutored by a shadow that held a lamp. Meanwhile, I gathered quiet evidence. Not to publicly shame, not yet, but to protect myself. Timestamps on sketches, saved drafts, forgotten emails with my early concepts, photos of my handprints on canvases drying in the night. I learned to be careful, to save every file with a name only I understood, to send copies to a private cloud that only I could access. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was a plan stitched with patience. I also found allies in places I hadn't expected. A boy from my class, Tomas, who fixed cameras for the theater. He once offered to help because his sister had been bullied too. He didn't like Chloe's popularity, not because he wanted drama, but because he saw how it swallowed people. He helped me set up time-stamped photos, and taught me how to watermark work without leaving obvious marks. There was an older woman who ran the second-hand art store downtown. She remembered me buying brushes years ago, and she kept a receipt with my name on it. Little threads everywhere, tying me back to the truth people had tried to erase. Elena pushed me further. "Turn your anger into narrative, not noise," she wrote. So I did. My next pieces were different. Layered, coded, beautiful in a way that made people pause. They were not accusations. They were stories with an undercurrent only those who knew could hear. A hand with a scar that looked like a smile. A shadow that held two faces. A chair with an empty seat and a single gold leaf on the floor. The posts gained a following. Art blogs picked up my images. They called the anonymous artist the voice of true suffering. People began to speculate about the artist's identity. And every time Chloe praised a piece in public, my chest tightened. The irony tasted sweet and slow. I never let anyone know the whole plan. Silence protected me. Strategy directed me. When people asked me why I'd stopped painting publicly, I'd only say, "I'm rethinking things." And I was. Quietly, with careful fingers and a patient heart. There were nights I almost gave up. The loneliness cut deep. The temptation to scream for justice in the hallways, strong. But Elena's messages were steady, a metronome of small commands that built a rhythm in me. Patience, craft, reveal when the tide is strongest. I began to believe her. One afternoon, at a small gallery opening in town, I watched Chloe from across the room. She smiled for photographers, talked about creative authenticity, and drank the praise like water. I felt no jealousy then. Only a calm that surprised me. She was a performance. All polish and practiced charm. I was something else. Deeper and quietly dangerous. A new plan took shape in my head. Not loud. Not destructive in the obvious way. But methodical. I would not attack her with words. I would reconstruct truth so carefully that when it came out, it would feel inevitable. People would not see me as the angry girl who wanted revenge. They would see me as the artist who revealed a lie. So I painted, and I posted, And I collected. And I waited. Every small victory added to a quiet pile of proof, every like a brick on the path I walked alone. And in the back of my mind, beneath every brush stroke, I rehearsed the moment I would step into the light again. Not to shout, but to show. Not to break, but to finish. Would you have been patient enough to wait for that moment? The day came sooner than I expected. It started like any other morning, until the school bulletin posted something that made my heart stop. Hartwell Academy students to feature in National Youth Art Week. Curated by Elena Quinn. My heart skipped a beat. Elena, my secret mentor, was coming to the school. The same place where my name was dragged through the mud. The irony wasn't lost on me. The universe had just placed my stage right where my pain began. That week was chaos. Students rushing, polishing pieces, whispering about who might be chosen to represent the school. Lara was already bragging, telling anyone who'd listen that she had a personal connection with the judges. I smiled quietly when I heard her, because this time, she wasn't wrong. I sent Elena one final message that night. It said, "You'll see the truth in gold and shadow. I'll let the art speak, as it always does." No signature. No name. Just that. When she replied, it was simple. "Then I'll be watching." I worked in silence that week. No one noticed me entering the studio after hours. No one asked questions when I borrowed old frames from storage. The janitor nodded as I passed, used to seeing me there at odd hours. My new piece was called Echoes of Hands. It was the same concept as before, the same soul, but with a mirror built into the design. A trick of light and reflection. When you looked close enough, you saw two sets of hands, mine and my mother's. But if you stepped back, you saw a faint projection of the defaced piece underneath, the word liar, barely visible, buried beneath layers of gold. It wasn't revenge by fire. It was revenge by reflection. When submission day arrived, I placed it quietly in the gallery hall. No announcement. No name tag. Just artist, unknown. The next day, students gathered around the display room as the judges arrived. Mr. Hayes looked nervous. Lara looked radiant. She'd entered a piece called The Weight of Love. When I saw it, my breath caught. It was my old concept, my color palette, my theme again. But this time, it didn't scare me. It almost made me laugh. Elena walked in gracefully, tall, poised, her eyes scanning the room like she was reading everyone's soul. She moved from painting to painting, polite smiles, small nods, until she stopped, in front of mine. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she turned slightly and said, "Who created this?" No one answered. Lara stepped forward and said, "It looks a bit like something my friend used to make, before she got disqualified for copying me." Her tone was light, playful, practiced. Elena's eyes lingered on her for a moment, then back to the painting. And in that stillness, I saw it: recognition. She knew. Later, when the results were posted, there was silence in the hallway. Only one word on the notice board. "Winner, the Mute Muse, Echoes of Hands." Lara's smile cracked. The whispers spread like wildfire. "The Mute Muse. Who's that? Wait, didn't that piece look like something Amara used to paint? Didn't she say she quit?" I didn't have to say a word. The truth was already speaking louder than my voice ever could. Elena met me after the event, outside near the fountain. She looked at me and simply said, "Silence doesn't just remember, it rewrites." And I smiled, because finally, silence wasn't my prison. It was my weapon. But that wasn't the end. Because Lara wasn't done yet. She wasn't ready to lose. Not to me. Not publicly. And what she did next made everything spiral out of control. Would you have stopped there? Or gone all the way like I did? The days after the exhibition were strange. For the first time in months, people looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. whispers followed me down the halls. Is she the mute muse? Did she really win without saying a word? I didn't answer any of them. Silence was still my shield. And now, my signature. Valara. She couldn't stand it. Her laughter in the cafeteria became sharper. Forced. Her perfect social circle began to shrink. One by one. People avoided her. Not because of me, but because the truth had started to leak. Rumors spread that she had stolen my idea, that I had simply reclaimed what was mine. She tried to fight it, posting old photos of us painting together, captioning them with things like, "So proud of how far we've both come, Redheart." But her words smelled of desperation. Then, one Friday evening, it happened. I was alone in the studio, my safe place. The room was dimly lit, paintbrushes scattered across the table, half-finished canvases leaning against the wall. I didn't hear her come in. Only the sound of the door slamming shut. "Was this your plan all along?" she hissed. Turned slowly. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged, her voice trembling with anger. "You think you can just show up with some fancy mirror trick and make me the villain?" Her words echoed across the empty room. I didn't answer. I just kept painting. That silence broke her even more. She stormed toward me, snatched the brush from my hand, and threw it against the wall. Paint splattered across my face. The canvas. The floor. "Say something," she screamed. "Admit it. You wanted to destroy me." My hand trembled, not with fear, but with restraint, because deep down, part of me did want to destroy her, but not with fists. Not with fire. With truth. So I finally spoke. My voice was calm. Low. Almost too quiet to be heard. "I didn't destroy you, Lara. You did that the moment you forgot what friendship meant." She froze. That single sentence, the first I'd said to her in weeks, cut deeper than any insult could. For a second, I saw guilt in her eyes, real and raw. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She stepped closer, her tone turning venomous. "You think you've won, don't you? You think Elena's going to save you? You're still nothing without me." I took a slow breath, then whispered, "No, Lara. I'm finally something without you." She stood there, shaking, then shoved the easel to the ground and stormed out. The sound of the door slamming echoed like thunder. I stood there in silence, surrounded by broken glass, torn sketches, and splattered paint. But I didn't cry, because for the first time, I realized something powerful. I wasn't fragile anymore. I was becoming something else, something stronger. Later that night, I received a message from Elena. "You've been quiet since the exhibition. How are you holding up?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I'm learning that silence can be loud." She replied almost instantly. "Then use it wisely. The world is listening now." And she was right, because the world was listening. But not everyone listening wished me well. That's when the threats began. Anonymous messages, strange comments on my art posts, things like, "You don't deserve what you have." The truth always comes out. First I ignored them, until one night, someone slid a note under my door and said, "You took everything from her. Now it's your turn to lose." And beneath it was a photograph of my unfinished painting, taken from inside my locked studio. Someone had been inside. The next morning, I walked into the studio and froze. Something felt wrong. Off. Like the air itself had been disturbed. My brushes weren't where I'd left them. The drawer I always kept locked was slightly open, and my latest sketches, the ones for my next exhibition, were gone. My heart started pounding. At first I thought I'd misplaced them, but then I saw it, a single sheet of paper pinned to my easel. In red ink it read, "Silence can't save you this time." I staggered back, my chest tightening. Someone had been here. Someone who knew my space, my patterns, my silence. I reported it to the school admin, but they dismissed it as a prank. Teenage rivalry, they said. Probably someone jealous of your success. But I knew better. This wasn't jealousy. It was obsession. For days I couldn't focus. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow seemed to move. Even my mother noticed. "Amara, what's wrong, my child?" she asked one evening. I wanted to tell her everything. But how could I explain that my silence, the thing that once protected me, had now become a weapon others could use against me? Then came the night everything changed. It was raining heavily. The kind of rain that soaks through walls. I was alone in the studio again, trying to paint my way out of fear. Music played softly from my phone. Until, click, the lights went out. Darkness. Total silence. For a second I thought it was the storm. But then, I heard it. A step. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. "Who's there?" I whispered. No response. The sound moved closer. The air colder. My pulse raced. My hands trembling as I reached for my phone light. And that's when I saw it. My canvas slashed. A knife mark right across the painting of my mother's hands. Then, a shadow moved in the corner. I screamed, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was a stranger's sound, full of fear and rage. The figure bolted out the back door. I chased after them. Barefoot, heart thundering. The rain blurred my vision, but I saw just enough. A tall figure in a dark hoodie, running toward the gate. They dropped something as they escaped. A silver bracelet. When I picked it up, my breath caught. It was Lara's. The same bracelet she wore every day. The one engraved with her initials. I stood there, soaked and shaking. Lightning flashed above. And in that moment I knew, this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, I went to confront her. But she wasn't in school. She hadn't shown up for days. And when I finally gathered the courage to visit her house, her mother opened the door with swollen eyes. "Lara's been admitted," she said softly. "She had a breakdown." My heart stopped. She was in a psychiatric facility, and all she'd been saying since the night of the break-in was my name. "Amara. Amara did this to me." Suddenly, I wasn't sure who the victim was anymore. Was I the avenger? Or had my silence turned me into something else entirely? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every thought, every emotion, every flash of that stormy night kept replaying in my mind, until finally, I went back to the studio, to the destroyed painting, to the broken silence, and for the first time, I painted something darker, something that frightened even me. A faceless girl, standing before a burning canvas, with a single phrase beneath it. "Art imitates revenge." Would you have done the same? Would you have stayed silent, or struck back harder? Weeks passed, and the world moved on. But I didn't. Everywhere I turned, whispers followed me. Some called me cursed. Others said I drove Lara insane. Even my teachers looked at me differently now, with pity, or fear, or both. The silence that once made me invisible now made me infamous. I thought about quitting, packing up my brushes, and walking away from art forever. But then I remembered what Mr. Hayes once said. True art isn't born from peace, it's carved out of pain. So I picked up my brush again. Not to prove myself, not to win awards, but to tell the truth. I started a new piece. One unlike anything I'd ever done. A painting titled, "The Art of Silence." It was raw, haunting, emotional. I painted faceless figures, whispering behind a girl who stood alone, her mouth sealed, her eyes open. And in her hands, she held a broken heart, stitched together with gold. Each stroke felt like therapy. Each tear that fell on the canvas added texture. Mr. Hayes noticed. "You've changed, Amara," he said softly one day. "Your work feels powerful." I smiled faintly. "Pain makes great teachers," I replied. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. But little did I know, Lara's mother had seen my painting online, and it stirred something inside her broken daughter. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A soft, trembling voice whispered, "Amara?" Froze. It was Laura. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She sounded fragile, almost like she was calling from another world. "Laura, where are you?" I asked quietly. "I saw your painting," she said. Her voice cracked. "The girl with the sealed lips. That's me, isn't it?" I swallowed hard. "No, Laura, it's me." A long silence followed. Then she laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was hollow. "You always knew how to twist things beautifully, didn't you? Laura, what do you want?" She whispered. "I want to finish what we started." The line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every sound reminded me of that stormy night. The slash of the knife, the sound of footsteps, the flash of lightning. Only now, I started wondering, what if it wasn't her that night? What if someone wanted me to think it was? Because when I looked closer at the bracelet, I realized something I'd missed. The engraving wasn't just LJ. There was another mark beside it, a faint H. "Mr. Hayes." My blood ran cold. Suddenly, his words echoed differently in my head. "Your art doesn't just speak. It breathes. True art is carved from pain." Had he been watching my pain? Or creating it? I dug deeper. I went through old files, exhibition entries, and emails. And that's when I found it. A forwarded message from Mr. Hayes's account to Laura. Subject line: "Her work is good, but she's too naive to protect it." My hands shook. He'd been the bridge between us, feeding her my ideas, pitting us against each other for his own ego. Laura hadn't betrayed me alone. She was manipulated. We both were. My silence had kept me from seeing it sooner. But now, I saw it all clearly. This wasn't about art anymore. It was about power and control. So I made a decision that night. No tears. No fear. No hesitation. If he thought I was still that quiet, harmless girl, he was about to learn what silence can really do. Would you have confronted him immediately? Or planned quietly like I did? The next few days, I barely spoke to anyone. But my silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. Every time I looked at Mr. Hayes, I saw layers of deceit behind that calm smile. He still carried himself like the kind mentor. But I knew better now. He thought he could control the story. He thought he could control me. But what he didn't know was, I had already started rewriting the script, in silence. I went back to the studio one evening, pretending to be working on a new painting. The door was open, the same way it always was when he accidentally checked in. And just like I expected, he walked in quietly. "Still working late, Amara," he said with that practiced smile. I looked up slowly. "Art doesn't wait for the morning." He laughed softly. "Dedicated as always." But I noticed his eyes, scanning the canvas behind me, trying to see what I was working on. He didn't know it yet. But that painting wasn't just art. It was bait. I'd titled it "The Hands That Shape the Noise." A symbolic portrait of a faceless teacher, puppeteering two shadowy figures, their faces blurred, their strings painted in crimson. It was haunting, disturbing, and deliberate. I saw him freeze for a split second. Then he said, too casually, "Interesting piece. What inspired this?" I smiled faintly. "Experience." He didn't say another word. But I saw it, the flicker of fear in his eyes. Later that night, I uploaded a digital version of the painting to the school's private art forum. Anonymously, with the caption, "The truth has many colors, even when painted in silence." By morning, the post had gone viral across the academy. Students whispered, teachers gossiped, the art board started asking questions. Mr. Hayes avoided me completely. Until one afternoon, he asked to see me privately. "Amara, close the door," he said quietly. I did. The room felt heavier than usual. He leaned forward. I know what you're trying to do. And you're making a mistake. A mistake, I whispered. I'm just painting. You're provoking people, he said sharply. People who can destroy your career before it even begins. I tilted my head slightly. Like you did with Lara. His face stiffened. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then he smiled coldly. You think you know everything, but you don't. Oh, I know enough, I replied softly. I know about the emails, the exhibition manipulation, the favoritism, the way you turned two friends against each other. He stepped closer. You have no proof. I smiled again, the same calm he used to weaponize. Proof is overrated, sir. But perception, that's everything. He froze. Because what he didn't know was, I had recorded everything. Every word, every whisper, every slip of control. And that night, I uploaded a short video montage. A silent compilation of his comments, his mentorship manipulation, overlaid with clips of my painting process, and the haunting line. The artist speaks, even when she says nothing. By morning, it wasn't just the school that saw it. It was the entire art community. He was suspended within hours. An internal investigation began. And for the first time, I felt like my silence had found its sound. But strangely, I didn't feel happy. Not yet. Because I still hadn't faced Lara. Would you have exposed him quietly like I did? Or would you have gone public with everything? Days turned into weeks. And though the school buzzed with gossip and rumors, I kept my head down. Mr. Hayes's suspension became official, but deep inside, I knew this story wasn't over. Because no matter how loud the world became, my silence still whispered one name, Lara. One evening, I received an invitation, unexpected and unsigned. It was for a small private art showcase in downtown Wellington, at a place called the Broken Frame. At first, I wanted to ignore it, but curiosity, and something deeper, pulled me in. When I arrived, the room was dimly lit, filled with soft piano music and half-finished canvases. And then I saw her, Lara. She looked different. Thinner. Quieter. Eyes shadowed with exhaustion and regret. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, You really did it, didn't you? I swallowed. Did what? Turned silence into power. Her words hit me, not as an accusation, but as an acceptance. She looked around the gallery. And that's when I noticed something strange. Every painting in the room was hers. Only, they weren't beautiful anymore. They were haunting, distorted images of friendship, betrayal, regret, and pain. Each one had a single word scratched into it. Sorry. I felt my throat tighten. She turned to me slowly and said, I was never strong enough to face you, Amara. Her eyes watered. He used us. He fed me your ideas, told me you were his favorite, made me desperate to compete. She took a shaky breath. And I believed him. Because envy is easier than honesty. I wanted to hate her. To scream. To tell her she destroyed everything I worked for. But standing there, I saw something else, a broken girl, haunted by her own silence. So I said softly, We were both his art pieces, Lara. He just painted us against each other. She looked down, ashamed. I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't come here to give it, I whispered. But I didn't come to take revenge anymore either. A long silence followed. And for the first time since everything happened, that silence felt peaceful. Lara smiled faintly. You've changed. So have you, I replied. She handed me something wrapped in brown paper. When I opened it, it was my painting. The original mother's hands. Restored. Carefully. Beautifully. She whispered. I kept it safe, all this time. Tears filled my eyes, not of anger, but of release. I reached out and hugged her. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest finally lifted. Have you ever lost someone and realized forgiveness was the only revenge left? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done? The exhibition ended quietly. We both left without promises, just peace. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from a national art magazine. They'd seen my latest piece, The Hands That Shaped the Noise. They wanted to feature me on the cover as the girl who spoke without words. I smiled, because for the first time, I realized silence didn't break me, built me. And though my story began in whispers, it ended in applause. Have you ever turned your pain into power? Would you have forgiven or walked away forever? Tell me in the comments. I'd really love to know. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe, because more stories like this, stories of pain, power, and poetic justice, are coming soon. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence was only the sound before my victory.